Hello, welcome, good evening. This is fantastic. What a beautiful crowd. What a beautiful night. Tetsuya, congratulations. Before we begin, I'd like to ground us by acknowledging that the Walker Art Center and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden are located on the contemporary, ancestral, and traditional homelands of the Dakota people. This site, which was once an expanse of meadowland and marshland, holds meeting for Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people from other Native nations who still live in community today. We are thrilled to have you all here tonight to celebrate the opening of Tetsuya Yamada Listening. Tetsuya's work explores the shifting boundaries between art and life. His objects and environments invite viewers to look and to listen, to consider the surfaces and substance of things, and to notice the poetry of the everyday world. The exhibition that opened today surveys more than 20 years of the artist's work, and we are so excited to have him and Siri here tonight in conversation to discuss the show and Tetsuya's practice. You two have been in dialogue for a long time. It's also my great pleasure to acknowledge that the many generous supporters behind the exhibition include Walker trustees John Christakos and his wife Deborah, Walker trustee Michael Peterman and his husband David Wilson, and RBC Wealth Management. We'd also like to thank Paula Cooper and the Japan Foundation, New York, for supporting the exhibition catalog. Following the talk, we'll invite you all to join us upstairs in Cargill Lounge for drinks and special bites by Chef Karen Tomlinson of Muriel, and to see the exhibition, of course, if you haven't already. It's stunning. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Siri Engberg, Senior Curator and Director of Visual Arts at the Walker, and Artist of the Evening, Tetsuya Yamada.
Thank you, Amanda. And I'm going to introduce Tetsuya. Thank you all for coming today. In addition to those of you who may be discovering his work for the first time tonight, I also want to extend a really warm welcome to Tetsuya's many friends, colleagues, and supporters who are joining us this evening. And especially his family, Renee, who celebrates a birthday tomorrow. Happy birthday, Renee. And their daughters, Risa and Rie, we're so pleased to have all of you celebrating this evening with us tonight. As we open the exhibition, I want to echo Amanda's thanks to our funders and to supplement the info in your program notes, which summarizes Tetsuya's achievements. I'd also like to take this opportunity to introduce him in a little bit more of a narrative way, I guess, and share some quick background on the exhibition before the two of us begin our conversation. Born in Tokyo in 1968, Yamada spent his youth immersed in the city's skateboarding and punk music scenes of the 1980s, while at the same time absorbing into his creative consciousness such culturally ingrained forms as the tea ceremony and traditional crafts. He went on to complete his BFA in ceramics at Tamagawa University, Tokyo, and has lived and worked in the U.S. since 1994, when he came to complete graduate work at New York's Alfred University, receiving his MFA in ceramics. Through various turns of events, Tetsuya decided to stay here in the U.S., and since then has developed a body of work that interweaves a fascinating array of influences into a diverse yet interconnected visual and material vocabulary. It is this conversation between and among works and ideas that we hope this exhibition, the artist's first U.S. Museum Survey, will bring forward. The show features more than 60 works, tracing the development of his practice, one that centers ceramics, yet considers the medium as a point of departure for other media, including sculpture, painting, drawing, video, and site-specific projects. It's a great pleasure to be presenting this exhibition in Minneapolis, the city Yamada now calls home, and where he has been a respected and influential faculty member in the Department of Art at the University of Minnesota since 2003. In assembling this exhibition, I've had the great privilege of working alongside the incredible staff at the Walker, whose spirit of collaboration and many talents allow our projects to soar. I'm grateful to Executive Director Mary Cerruti and Chief Curator Henrietta Haldish for their enthusiasm for this exhibition and commitment to sharing Yamada's work with broad audiences both here and beyond. I also want to extend a very special thank you to curatorial fellow Laurel Rand Lewis, who has made innumerable contributions to this project, to Registrar Jessica Rowland, who helped organize all of its logistics, designers Brian Huddleston and Ian Babineau, who respectively led the sensitive design of the exhibition's graphics and upcoming publication, Janine DeFeo, Pamela Johnson, and Sarah Lampin, who led our efforts around gallery interpretation and accessibility, and lead preparator Peter Hanna, who oversaw the work of our phenomenal installation crew, a group of talented artists, carpenters, woodworkers, technical specialists, and creatives who brought their collective energy to the gallery to realize the installation with the artist. I also want to acknowledge the efforts of my colleagues Amanda Hunt, Lena Menifee-Cook, Jessica Hakala, Sophia Reed, Ryan Ellingson, and Megan Leafblad for organizing this evening's events and upcoming public programs. Megan will be taking the stage following our conversation to introduce tonight's community opening and Chef Karen Tomlinson. And lastly, I want to extend my sincere gratitude to Tetsuya Yamada, whose studio I first visited in, I think, around 2012, beginning an ongoing and very generative dialogue that has led to the acquisition of several major works in our collection and now to this project. So thank you for everything, Tetsuya. We're so happy to have your work in our midst. And now please join me in welcoming Tetsuya Yamada to the stage. Welcome. Are we on? Yeah. Okay. Well, I have so many questions for you, and I wanted to say at the beginning that when Tetsuya and I were talking about this program and knowing how many of you know him and know his work, we wanted to keep the conversation between the two of us maybe a little shorter than the usual dialogue and allow more questions from all of you. So we're going to kind of break at a designated time and then have more of a three-way conversation between all of us. So stay tuned for that. So Tetsuya, maybe we should start here, which was where I first got to know your work. I really wanted to show a few images of the studio, which is a place I find absolutely delightful, and talk a bit about sort of the beginnings of your practice, perhaps. Yeah. Maybe we should start with ceramics and how did you come to the medium? I'm going to keep my questions short to hear more from you.
Okay. First, thank you so much for coming out this evening, and I want to thank to the entire Walker team for your help and the support. So thank you so much. So how did I start ceramics? Perhaps best way to explain is that I wasn't really seeking for ceramics. Rather, clay found me. Meaning we have college entry exams in Japan. This is a sort of like a different system than here in the US. And if you want to go college, you will have to dedicate it, spend time to prepare for the college entry exams. If you don't get in, a lot of people actually wait for another year, and the status called the ronin. And so I had an idea that I wanted to go to college in generally and started spending time for preparing the exam. Soon after, I found that there are art schools and art programs at university, college level. And of course I knew it because my mother went to art school for the college. But I guess I didn't really sort of connect it to my case. And as soon as I found that, there are art schools and art colleges and programs, so I began spending more time, which was much more, aligned with my interests. So spent time to study for it. And my priority was to get in the college somehow because I wanted to put that behind me. And may not be always the best idea, but and I wanted to study design, because design was the probably most connected to the contemporary culture, so I was very interested and attracted by it. However, the design was very popular, so a lot of people apply, and there is a risk that I might not get in. So that's no for me. So I looked at the other programs, and I looked at it, and there's a ceramics and fiber arts and small metals and so forth. So, and I thought, maybe this is a better chance for me to get into college. And among those, I felt that I can deal with ceramics for 4 years, and that's how I began. Yeah. And I hope this is some hope for you.
Based on that idea of clay and coming to clay finding you, I was hoping you could talk about the title of the exhibition, because as you shared with me, it has a lot to do with clay.
Yeah.
Listening.
So I have been working with clay mainly, and clay is such its own thing. They demand your time. They are very demanding. So it always consumes my time, but they demand my time because they have its own property, its own characteristic physical property. So you really need to listen. You really need to work with the clay. You can't really force it. So this idea that I work in the studio is that I always try to listen the material, and then further listening the process. So that becomes really important, and value of the studio practice that I believe. So that's the kind of idea that the title came to, listening. And I think one more thing is that I guess if the art is expression as a traditional way of thinking, I thought it would be interesting to propose that. What about art as a listening? So those kind of layers of thinking that came to my mind.
You've talked a lot about intuition too, where I would consider you an artist that's very open to listening to your own intuition and not letting it block you, but take you somewhere next. Is that accurate, do you think?
Yes, I think so. I think the level of consciousness in the process, thinking process and creative process is very important. So I guess something to do with that, I try to control the level of consciousness, and that becomes sometimes very intuitive. But you have to be able to judge, if that was the right choice or not. So there is always back and forth of that kind of process in the studio.
And in the studio, I think these conversations between materials, listening to materials, is something that I think you're doing quite a lot. One of the things I love about going on a studio visit over to your studio is that every time I come, there's a different kind of thing going on in there. You've recomposed things, you've moved things around, different materials are kind of in conversation with others. Maybe you've introduced a new piece and you want to see how it plays with the other materials. But I was wondering if you could talk about that idea of, you mentioned the truth of the material as it comes to you when you're thinking about what the next piece will be or how works will behave with one another.
Yeah, I like to looking at things. There are sometimes the piece that needs to go dumpster. But there are pieces that I want to kind of hang on to it and, spend time with it. I admire, pictures from, collectors that they lived with a great piece of art. Also, I admire Brancusi's studio. Have you been there? Pompidou Art Center. And, they have a little, Brancusi's museum. And, he lived there. He ate there, dinner, meals. He created there. I like that idea of, living with the artwork. So I tend to sort of, spend time with me. And sometimes I talk about fermentation, something that might come out of that. gives me idea. So that's kind of my studio.
A lot of the exhibition is in this picture, actually. We'll see. I want to change course. This will appear as a non sequitur, but it is all related. I want to talk about skateboarding.
Wow.
So I mentioned as in our introductions that that was a huge part of your youth, and I think, as you've shared, it was a huge part of the way you explored urban space. And urban space is a very big part of your work, and we'll see that in some of the things we talk about in a few minutes. But maybe you could share a bit about that experience as a skateboarder and how that has informed the way you approach making art.
Yes. So I was born in the post-war. It was very integrated between Western culture and Eastern culture. Oftentimes, younger people, back then I was, and were very much attracted to the new, Western culture. I was doing a baseball, elementary school up to junior high, and when I was young, my father took me a batting cage, and so I started going there often. At this batting cage, this owner is a kind of an eccentric kind of guy and had a skateball, ramp, and a go-kart around the batting cage. So I was exposed to skateboard from this going to batting cage and looking at the t-shirts and helmet. It's a neon, yellow, pink, and all that. Matte rat, pants was so great. Satin, shiny, yellow, orange, and everything was so fresh.
You just wanted the outfit.
Yeah, the graphic of the skateboard, and I thought, oh my gosh, I want to try. And so one day I, started trying. My first board was an Alva, and move on to a different board. But I did a ramp and all that, but we also did a street skate in Tokyo. I think today it's almost impossible to do street skate in Tokyo because there's so much complaints and much more people. Back then, we were able to do it.
So you had the city to yourself at night?
Yeah, at night, and sometimes a little bit of busy rush hour, but it wasn't really nice to do this, but we were doing it.
Mm-hmm. You were going rogue.
Yeah. So at night, we go out and find the spot. There was no, designated area, so we had to be creative. We had to find a spot to do so. So there are a lot of creative, sort of like a blank canvas the city has. Yeah.
And I think that idea of kind of going rogue or maybe pushing against authority or breaking rules. I mean, I think those are all ideas that seem to have played into your approach to making ceramics. You've told me about some of the traditions of the medium that, of course, are very much a part of Japanese culture, and how many of those you found maybe conservative or something you didn't want to necessarily play into, but maybe riff off of in some way as you were approaching clay. And once you went to graduate school in the U.S., maybe you could talk a bit about where you started thinking that medium could go for you.
Yeah. So when I was in Japan, I was very dedicated, for myself to do skating. But at the same time, I got really interested in traditional Japanese tea ceremony. They have so much rules, and it was very eccentric, strange, and I was very interested. That cracked ball to be very respected and valued, and very, very strange things. So I had those kind of two things, but. In Japan, those tea ceremony, tea culture, are very socially super conservative. So I wasn't really interested in that part. But the aesthetic and the form of it was so much. And after I came to the U.S., given the distance, I think I was able to sort of much more embrace and looking into. So it's a strange kind of a relationship. Sometimes it kind of makes me think of there's expression that good wall makes good neighbor. So this kind of distance kind of keeps my good relationship with my home country, I feel sometimes.
And we're actually looking at 3 fairly early works. You graduated from your MFA in the later 90s. So these were made around 97, 2000, fairly early in your career. The earliest work in the exhibition is 2001. But I know you've told me you were interested in looking at artists, like artists from the California clay movement, like Ron Nagel, for example, who were looking at clay as something that was not about making vessels, not about making a decorative object, but taking it to a place that could be considered sculptural, could be considered an artwork that was not a functional object in any way, and also the fact that, as you said the other day, clay, no one was paying attention to clay in the late 90s. You want to talk a bit about that and where that let you go?
Yeah, I am doing this long enough that I have been through this time that, the art world, didn't care about clay. Today, it's a very different story. So there was my predecessors as well, Peter Vokas and all those great artists that have gone through. But there is always this kind of mentality of I'm going to prove you wrong someday. So that was a kind of mentality. Pieces here, some of the pieces very much influenced by, Noguchi was a so strong influence, before I came to here, because his life between the U.S. and Japan was something that I felt that very refreshing from the from the traditional art form in Japan. There was a Noguchi show at the Tokyo Modern Museum, 80s, 90s maybe. No, 80s perhaps.
Like a big retrospective.
Yeah, and that really blew my mind, and something, that experience kind of motivated to think about maybe I want to go to the U.S. and study. I can't remember what was the question, but I was curious about where some of these early works came from in terms of the way you were thinking about clay. Yeah. I mean, I know you. The Arte Povera artists have made an impression on you, artists who emerged in Italy in the mid-'60s using really humble materials, objects from nature, things like string, like you're using in this piece, wood, found pieces of wood. Yeah. The Monoha artists in Japan, also in the mid-'60s, who were really thinking about non-art materials to make art that would exist in space. Yeah. And did any of that inform some of those approaches early on for you? Yeah, I guess earlier on, probably the piece on the left, which is same thing, left. This is actually from 97, one of the pieces that was in my MFA thesis exhibition. And, I started using this wood log as a sort of base for ceramic objects. To look for the logs or a base was maybe beginning of sort of spirit of try to go find something. Yeah. So that might be the beginning, and since then, the found objects were so much is part of my work. This is the earliest work in the show, 2001. What I love about this is that you're already combining something that seems very humble. Looks like almost it came from a shipping dock, like a pallet or something, with these exquisite ceramic objects. Can you talk a bit about the way some of these have come to be in terms of how you're working with glaze and clay and letting the maybe chance take over in the way the composition forms? It's very painterly. Yeah. So there
sorry.
are. Whoop.
That was a mistake.
That's a young Tetsuya.
Look at the glaze. Yeah.
Yeah. So there are wood component and ceramics component. They are, it's hard to see, but if you go to the gallery, you will see. So in this particular case, I glaze as a stripe, and I let the glaze to run in the kiln while I'm firing. So a lot of finishing completion happens in the kiln, and that's actually in general that's what the ceramic is. We finish with the kiln firing, and but I was very much particularly interested in the process to really bring that kind of a result from that very unique process. So.
And then I wanted to bring us to this one.
Yes.
So as you've talked about the work, and as you'll see in the exhibition, there are many works that really play with that relationship between the found object and the handmade object, or the industrial object versus something that's very refined. These are both images from Kohler Corporation in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, which has a fantastic artist residency program that Tetsuya has participated in twice. One of them was as early as, what was it, the first
2002,
one?
maybe?
2002.
Yeah.
But you've talked a lot about how that was quite a formative experience for you. This is Kohler Corporation makes toilets, sinks, urinals, all manner of bathroom and kitchen fixtures, plumbing.
Everything. Yeah.
But artists are invited to go work alongside the factory workers and use the materials for all of that industrial production.
Mm-hmm. So Kohler program is art and industry. Very, very unique program. I never seen anything like this in the world. They actually basically put artists in the factory, and they let us use whatever they use. So I was in the factory with the factory workers, and very, very fascinating. I never worked in the factory, so it was very much kind of eye-opening. People there in Wisconsin, hardworking, really good, people. They are all about hunting and peckers.
I'm also from Wisconsin. I know this.
So, but it was really, really great. So I, you become a friend with the factory workers. Certain factory worker come check on you, how's it going, and so you socially, you become part of it, and that was something I was very much interested in. And the first shift they come in, I can't remember 6:30 or 7. I wanted to be the same, so I would go there same time.
Wow.
And work through whole shift, and I often stay. Mm-hmm. They go, and one before I finished my program, one guy came to me and I've seen so many artists, but I never seen artists working like you. I get here and you already here, and when I leave, he's still there.
You were making them look bad.
So that sort of a very intensive physical manual labor, which was really, really interested in. But anyhow, but this is really also interesting because I was able to see how urinals are made. And it was no longer ready-made. So that was really sort of like my third encounter of fountain by Duchamp. My first encounter of fountain is my college class, Western art history class. I was dozing off, and this image came up, and I woke up, and I was able to stay.
You and a lot of other artists.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm putting these up as a reference for those of you who aren't familiar with Marcel Duchamp's Fountain. Really, really important piece. And Brancusi, who I know was also quite influential to you. I just got the 5-minute warning, so we're going to move a little faster. But these are works in the show that are related to that influence, I think. I'm going to flip through a few of them just so people can kind of see that relationship. But I thought you could talk for a minute about this project. This came out of Kohler. This is the Cup Exchange, which will be happening here at the Walker. And it's the first thing you see in the galleries when you go into the show.
So the day is February 22nd, was it?
15th. February 15th.
So that's when we're going to do this. But the first time when I did this project was at 2000, I want to say 2001 or 2, in Knox College where I used to teach. And I made lots of cups at Kohler factory. And so in this gallery at Knox, I put all the cups and exchange with the viewers. And so first half of the exhibition was just all of my cups. And there was a day, middle of the exhibition, exchange day. And they came and all of the cups are exchanged. And so the rest of the half of the exhibition was the cups that the people brought.
That the visitors brought.
Yeah.
I love how that sets the tone of the show, this idea of art and life, the everyday. This is Everyday City, a piece in the exhibition that is in the Walker's collection and is really quite a showstopper in the middle of the gallery. This is something you, made soon after Kohler, where you were, again, thinking about that idea of the factory production and maybe taking some of that back to your studio.
Yes. Yeah, it was physically demanding, and it was very tiring. But soon after, I started kind of craving that physical, intensive physical labor. Mm-hmm. So I tried to make a factory in my studio, throwing, manually labor repeatedly, and there are 800, little over 800, pottery hand thrown on this piece.
I love seeing within the piece the variations in they look at first glance as if maybe these all came from IKEA or something, and then you look closely and you see very subtle differences. Each one obviously has this hand, and that's one of the things I love about walking through your show is seeing that evidence of the hand, of the choices being made between materials, the way that you're. This is a piece that has a bit of wear around the edges, and I asked you, is this something that we should clean off a little bit before we hang it? And you said, no, absolutely not. That's part of the process of moving it around my studio. It's the life of the object. This piece, your hands are touching it. Maybe you could talk a bit about that idea of leaving the mark of the hand.
Yeah. My old work, there are a lot of hard edges, especially from 2001 and so forth. But the handness is something that I really, really start to see as a humanity. So hand is something that became so important. It's its own creature that, sometimes I feel like a hand just kind of navigate me to where it needs to go. So that's kind of how my relationship with my hand.
And I like how some of the works also show that you've manipulated it in some way, or you've chosen to do something like create a line that is not with a straight edge. You're letting the hand really just be very obvious in the piece. And I was thinking as we talked the other day and walked through the galleries, you had mentioned to me something about the way some of these works come together via forces. There's gravity, there's heat, of course, in the kiln. There's this idea of equilibrium or balance that some of these works have with one another. This is a work, maybe just mention a bit of the info on this one because it's from the pandemic. I think it kind of plays into that idea of different forces that we can't see that maybe play into the way works come to be for you. Yeah,
so I am interested in the idea of invisible, such like gravity, or in Chinese they call qi, that energy that runs through our body, which you can't see. You can dissect your, body, and then, you don't see that qi. Or sometimes, I think about truth, that truth is sometimes invisible. So I'm interested in that sort of idea of invisible. During the pandemic lockdown, we couldn't go to the campus and studio and so forth. So we were forced to stay at home, and so I thought that I need to be productive. So I started digging a yard, just to kind of
So I did that too.
just to kind of organize, and I found so much glass shards from the yard. So I started collecting without knowing what I'm going to do. Eventually, this the idea of invisible and these kind of glass shards came together to So I decided to do this language. But also glasses were invisible.
Those were invisible. They were under the ground.
Yeah. So they are kind of layered meaning.
I wanted to move us through a few more things. This idea of gravity. This is a series called Gravitation, also clay. One of the things I love about the combination of objects in the show is that the clay sometimes deceives us. It sometimes appears to be one material when it's actually clay, or sometimes clay appears to be metal, or sometimes maybe something made of paper resembles clay. The walls of the exhibition are covered in a material called homosote, which is a soundproofing material you get at Home Depot. But to you, that's clay. It reminds you of clay. So there's a reason for that material choice. But I love looking at the way you're playing with some of those tensions, hard and soft, handmade.
Yeah. These are really focusing on the idea of gravity, roll the clay as a coil and just a form by using a gravity, and very, very subtle, work. But Basho, that old Japanese poet, he talked about something about the connection between the verse can be the water that goes over the sandy bed. I learned from Jim Moore, actually. I have to thank him. But I thought that was such a beautiful, idea. And so there is something about how things are connected, how things are behaving that can be just so subtle. Yeah.
And I want to bring us back to this idea of ritual and daily ritual activity, gestures, repetition. A lot of the works in your show and that I've seen in the studio have this idea of repeating something over and over again, whether it's making the same cup 800 times or making the same. Here we're looking at some knots that you've made as a sculptural that can be dispersed across the gallery. Is that something that you think about when you're working, repeating gestures, accumulating things into pattern?
Yeah, I think I was talking to colleagues on the other day. Ceramic, if you practice ceramics in the traditional sense, say on the wheel, you don't just throw one cup. You bring a clay and you set up everything. So you throw 5, 10, whatever. So there is that repetitive practice already embedded. And sometimes I think that might be something influence to myself. I'm not sure, but the Kohler experience was certainly, influence to the repetition.
Yeah, I think a lot of the works just have that feeling of kind of things that come together for many parts, and there's a really nice sense of that kind of rhythm through the work. I wanted to, I know I want to go over to questions in just a second. So, as we spoke at the beginning about the skateboarding and thinking about public space, that really links to a lot of works that you've done in the past couple of years. There's a whole section in the exhibition that really looks at some of these projects that have been done in public spaces. This is a skateboard ramp, an imaginary one made at Hair and Nails Gallery here in Minneapolis, a ceramic version of that. Some of the works in the exhibition really deal with this idea of that freedom of exploring the city. Do you want to talk about how maybe some of that came together quickly?
Yes. So this kind of goes back to my college time when I was looking at tea ceremony and all that traditional things. On the other hand, I was so dedicated to skateboarding, and those two things didn't go together. and it was always back on my mind somehow. I want to see those things might come together. And I feel like this show at the Hair and Nail gave me opportunity to do something about skateboarding. So gave me a chance to think about it.
And the public's. So the last few slides I'll show before we break for questions relate to a series of exhibitions that Tetsuya created over the past 5 years called self-published exhibitions. These were, here's an example of one piece that was in a group show, but started to take you kind of in that direction of doing interventions into found spaces. That's a piece from the Soap Factory. I'll go through these quickly as you're talking because I want to leave audience question time, but tell us a bit about what were you thinking with the idea of self-published exhibitions?
Yeah, so I guess extension of found object, but found space. The first time I thought about this is there was some space that I thought it was vacant, and someone told me that the landlord is there. I went there to just ask, can I use that space? And very generous, Mike Smith and James Brown. Mike Smith might be here. Thank you so much. But and he said, well, that's actually not our building, but I have a building that is vacant, powder horn, and do you want to come see it? Yes, and we went, and this is a very, very old gas station from 70s. And so I was able to use this. One thing that I, keep this sort of like my interest is that I do not ask for the renting because that kind of throw off my idea. But, I wanted to talk to them, gain the trust to do this. So there are a lot of, things that I need to be careful. I will tell them that I'm not going to paint, I'm not going to move the walls and those kind of things. And I may just clean up. And, I'm interested in the way just how it is. And also, long time commitment is a little, risky for them to commit. So I would just say, 5 days. I'm going to just install, first, second day. I'm going to do an opening, viewing. I'm going to get out of there on the next day. So, so, and then at the end, I pay $20 for, electricity that I may use. But, so that's the kind of elements that I'm interested in.
And it's time for Q&A. So I'll just let us keep rolling some images while we're talking. But why don't we? I know we have some ushers in the audience who are walking up and down the aisles with microphones. If we want to do a first question, do we have one here? There's one down here.
Thank you so much for this whole presentation, and thank you, Tetsuya, for landing in Minneapolis, of all places. I want to go back to something you said, very intriguing, about being in the studio and seeking control of the level of consciousness. And if you could break that down, what do you mean by consciousness? Are you talking about like concentration? Are you talking about focus? Or are you talking about something deeper, more that implies the sort of mystical chi sort of elements of things?
Thank you. The focus has to be strong. And what was that depth? Yeah. I think it's just a consciousness, awareness of something that, oh gosh, how do I explain? It's just a conscious of something, knowing something that, if you know so much and being conscious, that kind of brings directly to the work. And I feel like that work is always kind of the results to me. It's not interesting to me. So I try to bring the consciousness, unconsciousness as a sort of like alive. And how can what am I talking about? I'm not sure, but the conscious. Okay. Here's the thing. I can't remember the writer though, but he's sort of very established critic past. In his book, he talks about good poetry. How did he say? Good poetry has. There are places where you need to attention. There are places where you need to be unconscious, not and if that balance is good, it becomes a good poetry. And I think that's really kind of echoes to how I work in the studio, to me.
Kind of goes back to intuition and the subconscious and just trusting.
Perhaps, yeah.
Other question up here? There's one here too.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for this interesting introduction into your life. At the beginning, you talked about you were not quite sure if you want to be a designer. And I'm wondering, you have very famous countrymen like Tadao Ando. And I kind of recognized in one of your first images the repetitiveness of a pattern. And Tadao Ando also sometimes has in his concrete walls that repetitive pattern. And my question is, did you ever venture further into design and architecture? And can you imagine to exhibit in Tadao Ando's buildings?
Yes.
Now Shima, maybe?
Yeah, Tadao Ando is amazing. He's a real deal. He's so interesting. I hope you have a chance to kind of look into his work and his life. Actually, he grew up so poor, and he was he started doing boxing because he was kind of he fought and I can make money out of boxing, and so he started doing boxing. And another strong guy came and he was so strong, and he thought, okay, I'm not gonna survive in this. And he didn't go to school. He did all self-taught and passed all the exams. And he is so dedicated to his hometown, Osaka. He can live anywhere, but he's so dedicated to Osaka. So he lives there. He donated huge, beautiful children's library to the city of Osaka, and wonderful, wonderful. So my answer is yes. If I can show my work in Tadao's architecture, yes, I would love that. Yes, I actually have studied architecture a little bit. I do have a certificate, not a degree. I thought about, this was already, I was teaching at Knox, and I thought about maybe rethink about my career. I didn't know much about architecture field, so I took some, summer class, and I enjoyed it, but I knew that wasn't for me. Because there are so many layers, clients and all that.
I've seen a lot of your works though come together via model making. You do a lot of that.
Oh, I love model making.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yes, if you let me design your house, let me know.
There's a question right here. Oh, here comes the microphone.
Of all your projects, which one has taken the longest?
Good question.
Yeah, thank you, Will. Longest, wow. Okay, let's think about in the exhibition. Maybe the everyday city might have taken long time, because there's so much, throwing involved, and I did it every day, and so that might be the one. Yeah, but there are so many things that continue to happen, so there are a lot of things that takes a long time, but that might be the answer for you. Is that okay, Will? Yeah, thank you.
I think a lot of your work involves patience, right? You have to wait for the clay to dry, then you have to fire it once, fire it again.
Yep.
There's a lot of waiting.
Yes, clay demands. Yep. So much. Yeah.
Row 6 or so. You might be able to say it loudly. We'll see, but the microphone's on its way.
No, I'll try. I was wondering if you could say something about your sense of restraint in your work, sort of not over-embellishing, knowing when to say when. Is that a conscious aesthetic choice, or is that more responding to the qualities of the material?
The question was about the idea of using restraint in the work, and thinking about when a piece might be done rather than the keeping going. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I guess a question of when to stop working is one thing. I think it happens very, different kind of, aspects, but sometimes I have to stop working so that I need to go home. But otherwise, keep putzing around, and that's very not good. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that's also negotiation in the process that, how much to... Yeah, it might be something about the, how much I control, how much I do let them, let it go. It's a constant kind of going back and forth between, again, consciousness, unconsciousness. Step back, looking at it, was it a good decision? And then I go back in there again, and then go do the play again, come back, look at it.
You shared that's a very personal process. You don't work with a studio assistant.
Yes.
You're there. It's about you and the material.
Yep. I think materials can be very metaphoric. The process can be very, process provides me a narrative. Not always, but I often feel that's kind of,
I think we have time for one last question, and then we want Megan to come to the stage. So, final question.
Hi. I was wondering, when you started working with clay, were you hooked right away, or did you ever take a long break and try exploring a different medium?
I'm sorry, I took my consciousness looking for you first, and then...
When you started working with clay, were you hooked right away? No going back?
Interesting question. I don't know if I had that... Certainly, I didn't know that this is something I'm going to be doing for a long time. Or maybe I did, I'm not sure. It's a long time ago. Yeah, I don't know. I did have a very, I think, especially, I started learning a wheel throwing first. Yes, I was very much into it from the beginning. It was very fascinating. It's very different from anything else, of my life. And so I thought that was interesting. But, living in Tokyo, super busy and distracted, and it's very much experience is so fragmented. And I started feeling that those things kind of came together after I moved to here in the U.S., Alfred town, small town, cow and all that. And I was very shocked. Oh, my gosh. But that's kind of when I started feel like, the experience is becoming so meaningful. I do remember, I was just walking on the street and I'm thinking about my work. And I thought, wow, I never had this kind of experience in Tokyo.
Maybe I'm an artist. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Tetsuya, for sharing all of this with us, for sharing your exhibition with us and your work. We're thrilled to have it on view through July in the galleries. The galleries are open tonight through 9. And I'm going to invite Megan Leafblad to the microphone to tell us a bit about the evening, and also our chef, Karen Tomlinson.
Hello, I am Megan Leafblad. I'm our manager of public engagement here at the Walker. Tetsuya and Siri, thank you so much for this generous conversation. Thank you all who have chosen to spend your time with us this evening to gather and celebrate. We hope that you will join us now for the more convivial portion of the evening. Tonight is a part of a newer model, a community opening model that is co-hosted by our chief curator, Henrietta Holdish, and head of public engagement, learning, and impact, Amanda Hunt, who welcomed us first this evening. And so in addition to an opening talk, we worked together to pair a brilliant local chef with a singularly talented artist in exhibition. So I have a few housekeeping bits before we hear from Karen, who is going to help us get convivial together. First, we're going to be in the Cargill Lounge. So as you exit the cinema, you're going to go to the left. You'll go past our small gift shop. You can either take the elevator or the stairs up, and that is the Cargill Lounge. Adjacent to the Cargill Lounge is the Burnett Gallery, where you can experience Tetsuya Yamada listening. The ticket you received for the talk, this is your drink ticket. So your first drink is on us. If you have misplaced your ticket during the talk, you can see one of our VE team members and they will help you so you can enjoy that. And then I just want to introduce Karen, who is a wonderful human and a very talented chef. She is from here, from Minnesota, and at an early age saw the power of food in connecting people and was drawn to hospitality into the restaurant world. She learned to do some of her cooking in Paris at Le Cordon Bleu. She did a stint as a pastry chef, as a lot of female chefs do, but then spent a season at Fäviken with Magnus Nilsson and really found herself on a career path that to becoming her own owner, chef of Muriel in St. Paul. If you have not been there, you are so lucky to enjoy a small little taste of that tonight. She's been James Beard nominated. She's been featured in documentaries. She was the first female to win, is it Bouchon? Cochon 555, which is a national hog butchery competition. There's many accolades, but one thing that I think is really special about Karen and her restaurant is its focus on seasonal food, on the farmers who live here, their deep roots, their history, particularly the community of Dassel, Minnesota. I think Karen may share a little bit about that, but really this rich overlap in how we treat the natural world around us and how we treat the humans in those spaces. And so that is why we invited Karen here this evening to be a part of this. And so it is my joy to introduce Karen, and she's just going to say a few words, and then we'll get to that party portion of the evening.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here, and I'm sorry I have a little bit of I've lost my voice. I've been using it too much, but I promise there's nothing to be worried about. And I won't make you listen to this for very long either. Anyway, I'm so delighted to be here. I was so excited to hear about this exhibit and to see the artwork. I got a little sneak preview a few days ago, and it was really exciting to me because I felt like I could relate to a lot of it, and I hope that you'll feel a little bit when you have some bites upstairs. Using really good raw material is obviously really important to me as a chef. And I really love to strip everything back as much as possible to the purest form. I don't like to cloud too much. I don't like to overwork anything. And the elements are very important to me. So you'll see even a couple foraged things. Yes, we can forage in the winter. I went out on Monday. It was very cold. But I got some birch bark and some spruce needles and used those for a couple things that you'll have tonight. We do work with a lot of really small local farmers, really people who are just being incredibly innovative and creative in the way that they're bringing back old ways of farming, regenerative agriculture, to an area where that's really not the norm. You know, it's an area where if you drove through, you'd think, wow, this is all corn and soybeans. It's not. These folks are bringing a lot of diversity, agricultural diversity to that area. And I think they're really brave in how they're doing it. So we have a special kind of place as a liaison, as a restaurant, to introduce their work to more people. And as I tell a lot of our guests, I believe that beautiful food begins in community to create community. So I hope you'll feel a little bit of that tonight. And please pop over to Muriel sometime too.